alone.
Shut up, you big creep. I'll pull your ears down and tie them underneath your chin.
Who are you?
Who are you?
Lucas Wallencheck? Nathan Bridge?
Remember him? The smiling child star who once had the whole world watching him grow up. Jonathan seemed to have everything: fame, fans, and a future full of promise. But behind the spotlight, his life was quietly falling apart. At just 27, Jonathan was found dead in his apartment, a moment that shocked everyone who thought they knew his story. Many people blamed Hollywood, fading fame, and depression for his tragic end. But his father later revealed a different truth, saying Jonathan had been battling bipolar disorder for years. So what really happened to him? Tonight, we're going to uncover the painful reality behind the fame, and the story no one truly saw coming. Born in April 1976 in Connecticut, Jonathan Brandis seemed, from the very beginning, like a child the camera would love. With his bright, open face and natural charm, his parents sensed something special. By the time he was just 2, he was already appearing in print ads. At 4, television commercials followed. It felt as if the path ahead was glowing with promise, each step leading upward. At only 6 years old, he stepped into the role of Kevin Buchanan on One Life to Live, a breakthrough that changed everything for his family. Believing in their son's star quality, they made a bold decision, leaving the East Coast behind for Los Angeles. The gamble paid off. Soon, Jonathan was popping up on beloved shows like The Wonder Years and Full House, his boyish presence becoming familiar to millions of homes. Then came the opportunity that felt like destiny. In the late 1980s, casting began for the never-ending story, 2, The Next Chapter. Jonathan, now 13, longed to shed the sweetness of childhood roles and step into something deeper, more mature. He had even auditioned for Saved by the Bell, hoping to transition into teenage parts, but fate had other plans. Out of more than 600 hopeful young actors, Jonathan won the lead role of Bastian Balthazar Bucks, the lonely dreamer pulled into the magical world of Fantasia. It was a triumph that seemed almost storybook itself, yet behind the fantasy and bright lights, the journey was far from easy. The Next Chapter was far from magical behind the scenes. Director George T. Miller was constantly worried that strict child labor laws would slow production. His answer was intense. The young cast would rehearse a scene only once before cameras rolled. Sometimes 3 cameras captured them at the same time, pressing in from every angle to save precious minutes. For a teenager still finding his footing, it was a high-pressure education in Hollywood survival. Yet Jonathan refused to be overwhelmed. Even though the film struggled at the box office, his momentum didn't fade. That same year, he stepped into darker territory, portraying young Bill Denbrough in It, based on Stephen King's chilling novel. Later, he would admit it was one of the toughest roles he ever faced, especially mastering the character's painful stutter. It demanded vulnerability beyond his years. Still, another transformation was quietly unfolding. Throughout his early teens, casting directors often fixated on his slight height. During the filming of Sidekicks alongside Chuck Norris, he stood at just 5 feet 4 inches, but adolescence caught up quickly. A sudden growth spurt carried him to 5 feet 9 inches, reshaping both his image and his confidence. Then came 1993, the year everything seemed to align. Jonathan landed a starring role in Sequest DSV, later retitled Sequest 2032, with Steven Spielberg serving as executive producer. As a teenage genius, Lucas Wollensack was aboard a futuristic submarine, and he finally had the steady television platform that actors dream of. It felt like stability at last. But sometimes, in Hollywood, the calm before the storm is the most deceptive of all. The first season of Sequest DSV became an unexpected sensation, and at its center was Jonathan Brandis. Even alongside respected veteran Roy Scheider, it was Jonathan who captured the loudest applause. Teenage viewers tuned in faithfully, not just for futuristic adventures beneath the sea, but to watch the soft-spoken genius Lucas Wollensack. Almost overnight, the boy who had grown up on camera transformed into a full-fledged teen idol, Magazines like Tiger Beat crowned him a top dreamboat, and the attention only intensified. Crowds of young fans began gathering outside the studio gates, hoping for a glimpse. The excitement grew so overwhelming that security guards had to escort him from the set each day. Letters poured in by the thousands, reportedly up to 4,000 a week, each envelope carrying admiration, expectation, and fantasy. For someone who had worked steadily since toddlerhood, this tidal wave of fame felt different. In interviews, Jonathan often appeared stunned by it all, as if still trying to understand how he had become a poster on bedroom walls. He once admitted he never saw himself as a teen magazine sensation. He had only ever hoped to keep acting. According to Scheider, Jonathan handled the frenzy with surprising humility, though he was still a teenager learning how to navigate attention and temptation. By 1995, at just 19, he had finally shed the label of child star. But teen stardom, glittering as it seemed, carried its own quiet pressures, ones far less visible than the flashing cameras. Amid the whirlwind of sudden fame, Jonathan Brandis found himself drawn to Tatiana Ali, known to millions from The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. They first met at a Halloween party in 1993. She was just 14, he was 17. The spark was there, but so were the complications. Age, experience, and the shadow of Jonathan's rapidly rising fame. Tatiana later admitted she felt unsure at first. He seemed older, more seasoned, already living in a world she was only beginning to enter. 2 years later, when he was 19 and she 16, hesitation gave way to romance. The media quickly crowned them a golden young couple, splashing their names across headlines. What looked glamorous from afar felt far more fragile up close. Jonathan couldn't step outside without attracting shrieking fans, while Tatiana was building her own spotlight. Jealousy, attention, and constant scrutiny crept in. He once confessed how exhausting it was to navigate rooms where admirers surrounded them both. Meanwhile, behind the polished exterior of Sequest DSV, chaos simmered. Despite its early success, producers clashed, executives walked away, and tensions between the cast and NBC grew louder. Jonathan had weathered fame's storm, but the real turbulence was only beginning. The second season of Sequest DSV arrived as both promise and warning. On one hand, renewal meant survival. On the other hand, it exposed just how fragile that survival was. NBC decided to overhaul the series, reshaping its tone and even relocating production from Los Angeles to Orlando. For Jonathan Brandis, it meant uncertainty not just about his role, but about his home and daily life. The instability didn't stop there. Cast members were dismissed without ceremony. Others chose to walk away, frustrated by creative conflicts and the sudden cross-country move. The set that had once felt like a launch pad now felt like shifting sand. Yet amid the chaos, Jonathan remained. In fact, part of the restructuring revolved around him. After season 1 turned him into a teen sensation, the network leaned further into his popularity, reshaping the series to attract an even younger audience. In a rare creative opportunity, producers allowed him to write an episode, The Siamese Dream. For a young actor still in his teens, it was both validation and responsibility. He could shape 1 hour of television, but he couldn't steady the larger ship. As backstage tensions deepened, season 2 struggled to regain its footing. By season 3, the show seemed lost in its own identity, constantly reinventing itself in a bid to stay afloat. Even respected co-star Roy Scheider reportedly clashed with producers and sought release from his contract. Ratings slipped. Storylines grew inconsistent. What had begun as a bold adventure was unraveling before everyone's eyes. Through it all, Jonathan remained the constant, appearing in every episode and standing as one of only a few original cast members left. Loyal and professional, he showed up each day determined to give his best. Perhaps he felt gratitude toward the network that had elevated him and trusted him with creative control, but gratitude could not shield him from disappointment. When the cancellation came, swift and mid-season, it felt abrupt and deeply personal. The submarine that had carried him to stardom had quietly sunk, and yet from the outside, his future still looked luminous. He was young, famous, and woven into Hollywood's tight circle of rising stars, including longtime friend Soleil Moon Frye, beloved for Punky Brewster. Few could sense that beneath the bright surface of teen fame, the tides were already beginning to turn. For a while, it seemed the storm had passed. In the years after Sequest's DSV, Jonathan Brandis quietly rebuilt momentum. He took steady work in television films and supporting roles, determined to prove he was more than a former teen idol. By the late 1990s, he appeared in theatrical releases like Outside Providence and Ride with the Devil. They weren't flashy leading roles, but they were real films, serious projects. For an actor who had always said he simply wanted to keep working, it felt like solid ground again. But as the calendar turned toward a new millennium, that ground began to crack. His next feature, Bad Girls from Valley High, struggled to secure distribution and lingered unreleased for years. Momentum stalled. The calls slowed. Hollywood, once so eager, seemed distracted by newer faces. At the same time, his personal life unraveled. In 2001, after 6 years together, he and Tatiana Ali ended their relationship. They kept the reasons private, but the timing was painful. For Jonathan, who had grown up under studio lights, stability had always been fragile. Losing a longtime partner during a professional downturn left him increasingly isolated. Then came what looked like redemption. In 2002, he landed a supporting role in Heart's War, starring Bruce Willis and Colin Farrell. It was a major studio production, exactly the kind of opportunity that could reignite a career. Jonathan reportedly placed enormous hope in the project, but when the film was finalized, much of his performance had been cut. In the official release, he was barely visible. The disappointment was devastating. It felt like building toward a lifeline, only to watch it vanish in the editing room. Still, he tried again. In 2003, he secured a role in the pilot for 111 Gramercy Park, acting alongside Tippi Hedren and Jaleel White, beloved for Family Matters. The series centered on staff members in a luxury apartment building, a modest but promising concept. Yet behind the scenes, Jonathan appeared deeply anxious. Jaleel White later recalled how often Jonathan asked whether the show would be picked up, as if the answer might determine his future. It never went to series. With the pilot shelved and Bad Girls from Valley High still trapped in release limbo, Jonathan felt increasingly adrift. Acting had been his entire world since childhood. Without it, he seemed untethered. Friends later shared that, around this period, especially after the cuts to Heart's War, he began coping in destructive ways. Heavy drinking crept in. So did a growing sense of failure and loneliness. The boy who once received thousands of fan letters each week now struggled in silence. Each setback chipped away at the confidence that had carried him from commercials to stardom, and as hope dimmed, the weight he carried became harder to hide, until it finally led to a confession that stunned those who loved him. By the final months of 2003, those closest to Jonathan Brandis began noticing something fragile behind his familiar politeness. Friends later shared that he had quietly confided in several of them, admitting he was struggling with his outlook on life. For people who had always known him as gracious, hardworking, and easygoing, the confession felt surreal. Yes, his career had faltered. Yes, his long relationship with Tatiana Ali had ended. But he was still young, still talented, still working. Surely there was time. And in many ways, there was reason for hope. That same year, Jonathan secured a substantial role in Puerto Vallarta Squeeze, portraying a CIA operative opposite veteran actor Harvey Keitel. It was the kind of gritty adult role he had long sought, a chance to step fully beyond the shadow of teen stardom. On set, he reportedly carried himself with renewed focus. Cast and crew saw the disciplined performer they had always respected. Keitel himself was said to be impressed, repeatedly praising the young actor's skill and presence. In the editing room, producers expressed confidence that this performance could mark the beginning of a major comeback, but belief from others is not always enough. The film wrapped in November 2003, and while colleagues anticipated what doors it might open for him, Jonathan had already experienced too many near misses, roles reduced, projects shelved, promises unfulfilled. Hope, once a steady companion, had become something more complicated. The weight of past disappointments lingered. Late on the night of November 11th, friends entered his Los Angeles apartment and made a devastating discovery. Emergency responders rushed him to the hospital, but the next day, at only 27, Jonathan Brandis was gone. The news rippled through Hollywood with disbelief. His producer on Puerto Vallarta Squeeze reportedly refused to accept it at first, insisting there must be some mistake. Former co-star Jaleel White later described staring at his screen in tears. Tatiana Ali's reaction was complex and painfully human. Grief sometimes arrives tangled with anger, especially when history runs deep. Meanwhile, his longtime friend Soleil Moon Frye, beloved for Punky Brewster, spoke openly of guilt, wishing she had recognized the depth of his struggle sooner, wishing she had listened more closely. In the end, what remained was not just the tragedy of a life cut short, but the memory of a gifted actor who had grown up before the world's eyes. Beneath the fame and bright lights was a young man still searching for steady ground, one who left behind performances filled with promise and a silence that still feels unfinished. In 2021, Soleil Moon Frye released the deeply personal documentary Kid 90, built from hours of home videos she had filmed during her teenage years in 1990s Hollywood. Within that intimate footage, Jonathan Brandis appears often, laughing, working, simply being young. For many viewers, it was like seeing a ghost brought gently back into the light. The film revived memories of his warmth and talent, but it could not soften the ache left behind. That same year, Jonathan's father, Greg, spoke publicly about his son's death. Contrary to assumptions that Hollywood pressure alone was to blame, he shared a different, more complicated belief. Looking back, he felt Jonathan had shown signs in his 20s of what he now recognizes as bipolar disorder. In his father's view, an undiagnosed mental illness may have played a profound role in his struggles, more than fame or fading roles ever could. Jonathan's final films, including Puerto Vallarta Squeeze and the long-delayed Bad Girls from Valley High, were released after his passing, quiet echoes of a career that once burned brightly. Yet beyond the credits and headlines, his memory endures in more personal ways. Greg has said he still speaks to his son, finding comfort in the feeling that Jonathan is somehow near. His story carries both brilliance and heartbreak, a reminder that behind stardom can lie unseen battles, and through that legacy, his father hopes others will seek help before silence becomes overwhelming.